Good morning, friends. Today's video is going to be about Lightsmith Avenging Crusader build. This build is something that is super popular right now, and it's incredibly strong. And I just kind of want to go over the general rotational priorities within wings and outside of wings, and then talk about one of the talents that is a little controversial at the moment. So one of the talents, the one that I'm going to talk about, obviously, is Tempered in Battle. So Tempered in Battle is very strong, but there are some issues with it. So there's a lot of bugs right now where it can actually just get people killed. If you place it on somebody and then somebody dies with their weapon, sometimes it can just kill you, which is not ideal. Another thing you need to be aware of with this talent is that if it drops you low, because let's say you put your weapon out on a DPS and then they take some damage right before an AoE event, it can drop you low by redistributing your health, and then it can get you killed that way. So there's a lot of danger with this talent. However, there are a lot of upsides as well. The overhealing contributes a lot of healing, and the redistribution from your weapon is actually a very effective way of stabilizing your group when somebody's in danger. So there are benefits and negatives. Right now, I'd say the benefits probably outweigh the negatives. However, the negatives are pretty bad, so kind of up to you whether or not you want to risk running it during progression. This is a build that works great in both Mythic Plus and Raid. I'll have a link to the Mythic Plus version of this build in the description below, but for now I'm just going to talk about the Raid playstyle. So actually, both in Raid and in Plus, the rotation within wings is always the same. Now, it's not a set rotation, it is a spell priority, because that's how healing doesn't work by set rotations. It always works just by spell priority. So I'm just going to kind of briefly go over the spell priority. The first, obviously, is Judgment. So when you're within wings, Avenging Crusader converts your damage into healing, and it makes Judgment and Crusader Strike deal more damage as well as your auto attacks. So this build is all about being offensive in order to heal. Your top priority is going to be Judgment. That's because not only do we have interactions with Truth Prevails, but we also have interactions with Hammer and Anvil, which is doing an absolutely massive amount of healing, both in Raid and Mythic Plus. So Judgment, number one priority when you're in wings. Second priority is Crusader Strike. Now, Crusader Strike changes based on whether or not you have Blessed Assurance. So if you have Blessed Assurance, then your second priority is always Crusader Strike. The way you get Blessed Assurance is by casting any Holy Power ability, which will make your next Crusader Strike deal 120% increased damage. This was actually supposed to be a prot buff. It was 20% before, but then it got buffed for prot by 100%, and then somehow Holy ended up getting that buff as well. Not sure if that was intended or not, but it stayed after the patch, so we're going to assume that it was intended. This means that basically you're going to want to try and weave in spenders in between your Crusader Strikes. So it's Judgment first, then you pop Crusader Strike if you have Blessed Assurance. If you don't, then you try to use a spender and then press Crusader Strike so that your Crusader Strike gets buffed. Your priority after Crusader Strike with Blessed Assurance is obviously spending Holy Power so that you can get more Blessed Assurance procs for bigger Crusader Strikes. If you don't have Holy Power, then your next priority would be Crusader Strike without Blessed Assurance. That one is not too bad, but ideally you always want to have Blessed Assurance. So hopefully you have enough Holy Power going into wings that you can kind of avoid that. And then obviously your last priority would be Holy Shock. I know that's a bit counterintuitive because you always assume that Holy Shock is like your highest priority, but with this build, it takes a backseat during wings to Judgment and Crusader Strike. Now, outside of wings, the priority is the same as the regular build, as Solar Crusade build. But during wings, the priority changes a lot. So outside of wings, it's just your standard, spot heal with Word of Glory and Holy Shock, build and spend Holy Power, your standard stuff. The nice thing about this build is that you get wings every 1 minute, so you have a lot more consistency with your cooldowns. But the downside is you definitely lose a lot of controlled healing. What I mean by that is Avenging Crusader is all smart healing, but it's not smart healing. Basically, it just prioritizes anybody at all that is injured. Even if somebody is 99% health, the spell is just as likely to prioritize that person as it is to prioritize someone who's 10%. It only cares whether or not a player is not at 100%. If they are at 100%, then it won't prioritize them. It'll only heal people who are injured. But if anybody is injured, it doesn't matter how much they're injured. So in that way, it's not actually a smart heal. It's just a sort of smart heal in that it doesn't heal players who are at full health. So keep that in mind. That's kind of the downside, is that your healing is completely random and you don't really have much control over where your healing goes. That being said, this build in Raid is doing so much more healing that it's definitely the better option, even though you lose a lot of that targeted healing from the regular builds. I still like the regular build more playstyle wise. I don't really enjoy this playstyle. Anybody who watches me knows that I'm pretty anti Avenging Crusader. However, there is no denying its strength right now. So I just kind of got to suck it up and play it in raid. The regular build isn't too bad though. If you really hate AC, it's not trolling to run the Solar Crusade build, to run regular wings. But if you're playing optimally and trying to min-max your throughput, you should be running this build in raid. I'm just going to quickly show the Mythic Plus build. Obviously, this looks very similar. The big difference is that instead of running Faith, you're running Virtue. Obviously, in Mythic Plus, Virtue has been huge this season. It fits damage profiles very well in all of these dungeons. So the big change in priority for Lightsmith in Mythic Plus is that you always want to prioritize getting Virtue out right before big AoE damage events. That's really the only difference. Inside of Wings and outside of Wings, the rotation is exactly the same as it is in Raid. So you don't really have to worry about learning new stuff for the Mythic Plus build. Just make sure that you're good about using Virtue, because that's the key to healing Mythic Plus right now. The last thing I want to talk about is Holy Bulwark and Sacred Weapon. Now, these are our holy armaments, which is kind of the core of Lightsmith. There is really not much to think about with these. So I know there's a lot of min-maxing that you could potentially do with Tempered in Battle and stuff, but in general, you really don't need to worry about that. We run the Divine Inspiration proc, so any procs that you get, you don't have control over anyways. That basically means that all you need to do when you're putting out your holy armaments is make sure that you don't cast Sacred Weapon on somebody who already has one. So make sure you're tracking these. If somebody has a Sacred Weapon and you place it on them, they won't get two. It's just going to override it. So you're going to lose a lot of value. That's why you want to make sure that you're always placing your Sacred Weapon on somebody who doesn't have it. Now, a question I get asked a lot is, does Sacred Weapon work better on some DPS specs than others? And the answer is no. It doesn't matter how much damage the player is doing. It doesn't matter how high their APM is or how many spells they're getting out. Nothing matters at all. It's pretty much just a flat proc either way. So you don't have to worry about min-maxing who gets your Sacred Weapon as long as it's just somebody who doesn't already have one. As for Holy Bulwark, treat it like any shield or heal. You want to place it on the player most in danger. There's really not much to think about. The majority of the time, I just throw this on the tank during trash, and during AoE, I try to get it out beforehand on one of the squishy DPS. That's really all I wanted to talk about. If you guys have any questions about this build, please leave them in the comments. I am happy to answer them. Otherwise, I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I'll see you for the next video.